because we are having very heavy time constraints, like especially some of you need to leave before 4 or 5, and we don't want you to miss the final panel session. So basically, we decided to cancel my presentation. And this session is going to be basically John's presentation. And after John's presentation, we're going to have a normal question and answer session, as we would in other conferences. So we're not going to have group work, as we did this morning and yesterday. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. So, I will put on the slides now. John, before I put on the slides, do you want to say something?
Well, just welcome. Thank you for the invitation to speak. Looking forward to the Q&A session. And we're ready. If your slides are there, I guess we're ready to go. I'm hoping today to leave you with some perhaps new ideas about making cause-effect claims in evaluating complicated situations. So if we're ready to go, we can go to the first slide.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the context that I'm talking about, I suspect, is familiar to most of you. It's basically saying that development interventions usually don't act on their own. There's a mix of actions and context typically involved, such things as other events and conditions in the local social economic environment, other interventions and actors that are working, and maybe other contextual factors, all of which make it fairly complicated to consider what cause-effect means. Yet, we who have guiding the intervention or perhaps paying for it, want to know what the intervention has accomplished. We want to know, did it make a difference? And those are the kind of questions I think that I'm going to try to talk to this afternoon a bit. I want to use an example at several points during the presentation, a fairly simple one, about an intervention that is trying to improve educational outcomes for girls through raising the knowledge, skills, and awareness of teachers of the girls. The simple theory behind this intervention would be that teachers with more training and skills in educating girls would provide teaching that is more attuned to girls and of more interest to girls, resulting in the girls more actively engaged in studying, wanting an education, and this would lead to better educational outcomes for girls. However, even a few seconds thought would raise a bunch of questions about other factors that are at play here. The extent to which the teachers, in fact, do support educating girls, the support of parents for their daughters to attend schools, and time available at home to study, access questions, can girls even get to the schools, and can the schools accommodate well and comfortably girls. So these are all some of the factors that are involved behind this simple example. Now we still want to know whether the intervention would affect it head. And the kind of causal questions one can ask are between the development intervention, in this case the training for teachers, and the impact, better outcomes. Can we say that if we do observe better educational outcomes for girls, what can we say? Can we say that the intervention of teachers cause the educational outcomes? I think it's fairly clear. The answer is no. The issue is rather more complex than that. Can we even say that improving the teacher's skills is necessary to get better educational outcomes. I would argue no. I mean, there's many other ways you might be able to raise educational outcomes for girls. Then is the teaching intervention on its own, is it sufficient to produce the better educational outcomes? Again, the answer is, I think, clearly no. We saw earlier in the previous slide a lot of other factors that are there that will influence the extent to which educational outcomes are in fact achieved. But still, we want to make some causal link between the intervention and the impact. But it's clear, I would argue, that the intervention is neither necessary nor sufficient, and that this is a very typical situation in real-world development interventions. What in fact is happening is that the intervention is part of a broader causal package, which might include some of those factors I mentioned about parent support, access to schools, etc. And that if the package as a whole works, then that would be sufficient to bring about the educational impact. And if the intervention is working, then you would hope it would be an essential part of the causal package. In other words, without the intervention, the causal package wouldn't be enough on its own to make things work. This concept of causality is very well established in the literature on causality and the philosophy of causality, and it relates to what's called an inus cause, which was introduced about mid-70s by a guy called Mackey. Inus being an insufficient but necessary part of a condition that is itself unnecessary but sufficient for the occurrence of the effect. This is again, I would argue, this is a very useful concept for the kind of situations I'm describing. Thus, I would argue that making it, or at least I'm defining here, that an intervention made a difference when it's a contributory cause. In other words, when the causal package that's associated with the intervention was sufficient to bring about the impact, and the intervention was a necessary component of that package. This is a contributory cause, and the intervention on its own, as I argued earlier, is neither necessary nor sufficient. An example everyone is familiar with is smoking and lung cancer. In the sense that smoking is neither necessary nor sufficient to cause lung cancer, it's a contributory cause. And it's that concept that is useful in thinking about and eventually sort of determining causality in these kinds of cases. And that this is, I think, I would argue, a fairly useful, I find a very useful definition of making a difference, and one that is different from the perhaps more common meaning of made a difference, which is what would have happened without the intervention. I'm using made a difference in a different context here. So we have, where are we here now? Are you with me? Okay. The intervention as a trigger? Sorry, I'm just going through here. I should have been asking if we're all looking at the same. You're on the same slide. Okay, this is good. So the idea is that the intervention is one among several causes in the particular case, which is kind of not very satisfying certainly for the donors and probably for those involved in the intervention. Just being one of many causes isn't all that illuminating. In fact, we can talk about the role the intervention plays in the causal package, such as a very common one would be that the intervention was a trigger that started a causal chain. that leading to the desired outcomes. Recognizing, yes, it's one of several causes, but it was the trigger that got things started, or it might have been in a more modest role, sort of providing sustaining support for change along the way. And I call this a principal contributory cause. And I think that's a useful addition to sort of just being a contributory cause. I want to take a second to talk about what I call here meaningful causal questions, because I think it's very important that if you're talking about making causal claims, that obviously depends on what question you're asking. And there are lots of questions you can ask, lots of causal questions one can ask, not all of which I would argue make sense or are in fact doable. So one question that I think is useful is the one I'm posing is, has the intervention made a difference? In other words, is the intervention a contributory cause? The other question that's very important is, of course, why has the impact occurred? We want to know not just whether it made a difference or not, but why. Why has the impact occurred? Or if it hasn't, of course, why has it not occurred? How do the causal factors sort of get together to bring about the result? It's the issue of context and mechanisms using realist terms, and the issue of what role did the intervention play. Example for my girls' education example would be if the question asked was how many girls have had improved educational outcomes as a result of the teacher training. I'm not sure that's a useful question, or one that's not that not doable in the context I've described. But it's the kind of question that's frequently asked by donors. How many people have been brought out of poverty as a result of the intervention? When in fact, of course, it's a much more complicated question than that. And then if you really wanted to know whether or not the educational outcomes related specifically to teacher training, you'd have to set up some kind of an experiment. Treat the intervention as an experiment, sort of changing its purpose, rather than an intervention that's trying to improve educational outcomes, structure it as a way of testing whether or not teaching training has worked, assuming one could do that. My point simply is that it's quite important to think carefully about what kind of causal question you're asking. Okay, so I'm arguing that in these contexts, we want to show that the intervention made a difference, that it's a contributory cause, and that's a very useful way of thinking about causality in these complicated situations. And how then would we actually show that an intervention made a difference? There's two issues here. One is talking about connecting to theory-based approaches for evaluation and establishing sufficiency through a generative view of causality using something like contribution analysis, although there are other ways also of doing that, such as using qualitative comparative analysis in some cases. So I want to spend the last few minutes on, very briefly, on this issue of how would you actually then go about showing that an intervention was a contributory cause. A minute on theory of change. I'm on theory of change now, the diagram. Yeah. This, when I speak of a theory of change, I'm thinking of something like this. The left-hand column there is a sort of a standard results chain impact pathway. The more interesting aspects of these kinds of pathways are the arrows. and hence the boxes which describe the assumptions, the supporting factors that are needed for that particular link to work, and that combination then is a theory of change. And I think that's important because it captures these other supporting factors in those dotted boxes. The right-hand side is showing, if one thought of going back to the girls' education example, that in fact, yes, we need to do more than just train these teachers to sort of be able to teach better. We have to get parents involved, communities involved. We need to worry about access to schools. We need to worry perhaps about accommodation at the schools. These are other supporting factors that would all be shown here on the right-hand side that would expand the intervention to a more comprehensive intervention aimed at trying to improve educational outcomes for girls. And that's sort of, again, I would argue, a very typical situation for a lot of development interventions. So the point is that theories of change are in fact causal packages. They show what the intervention is doing and the other supporting factors, as well as confounding factors that are in order for things to work, for the whole package to work. And they're more than a causal package because they try to set out the relationships between the intervention actions and supporting factors actions and things like that. So that the point is that the theory of change is a model of the intervention as a contributing cause. And I think this is a very useful concept of how to deal with these contributory cause ideas. That you have the very well-known theory of change idea is exactly what is a model of a contributory cause. A few quick words on causality. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there are different kinds of perspectives one can take on causality. And the one that we're interested in, I'm interested in, is the last one on this page, this slide, the generative frameworks that talk about step-by-step, sort of a step-by-step process view of causality. That's behind most theory of change applications. It's a different perspective on causality than sort of perhaps a more typical counterfactual framework that is another way of thinking about causality. But I think each of these is equally valid and can be used to sort of establish causal attribution. Then here I'm just suggesting in the contribution analysis slide that contribution analysis, the kind of stuff that I've been writing about for some time, is a way of showing that an intervention is a contributory cause. It would confirm that the results you expected occurred, assuming we have a positive outcome here, that the causal package is sufficient, that all the supporting factors have occurred as predicted by the theory of change. And if there are other plausible rival explanations that have been accounted for. In my girls' education example, possibly some of the improvements in girls' interest in and then not have better outcomes might be due. There's one other. If these are observed, one other plausible explanation might be that in this area, internet has become widely available, and there's been a self-learning phenomenon occurred that really had nothing to do with the teaching and some of the other things that are being talked about. But this could obviously be checked to see if that effect happened. You can check the contribution analysis, checks whether or not the intervention is necessary for the package to be sufficient. by looking at the package without the intervention and can explore the role the intervention played. And this way come up with, be able to make a causal claim, a reasonable causal claim about the intervention and the observed better educational outcomes. So last slide on messages. I would argue that many interventions, what we expect, that they are contributory causes and that they're hopefully principal contributory causes. That we want to obviously know why the impact occurred, and this requires an explanation of how things are working within the theory behind the intervention. That theories of change are indeed models of the intervention as a contributory cause and allow you to answer that why question, and the contributory contribution analysis, and indeed other theory-based approaches can be useful to explore and demonstrate contributory causes and make causal claims on that basis. That's my words. I've probably gone on a little too long here, but some references at the end, and be glad to, if there's time for some questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. So before we start collecting the questions, do you want us to show some of your slides or just your image from Skype?
I don't think my image is all that exciting. Maybe the last slide with main messages.
Okay, just give us a second. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes for questions. Okay, with Rosalind, shall we pick 2 or 3 questions? Okay, let's go with 2. So we have Rosalind Ivan and then Patrick Ward. Sorry, Rosemary McGee. Let us know if you can hear the question, John. Otherwise, we'll ask Rosemary to come to the microphone over the desk.
It's not so much a content question as that I think the slide was flashed up briefly that isn't in the handout, and I was interested to see it. The one about 4 approaches. 4 frameworks.
I'm not hearing the question.
Okay. So shall I leave this on for a while? Okay. So Patrick Ward.
Thank you. Shall I come up?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation, it's very interesting. And I'm no doubt beginning to develop a better understanding of what contribution analysis is. I can see its strengths, but it surprised me, your example, and I guess for me, in a sense, the question of how you would exclude plausible rival explanations in this case would surely be to look at other schools where the training hasn't happened, and surely that then opens the door in this sort of intervention to the issue of controls and randomisation. I can see that in other sorts of circumstances where that's not an option, you couldn't do that, but this seems to me that that would be a strength, a very strong way to eliminate plausible rival explanations for this sort of intervention.
Yes, one could. Again, it depends on the context. If the intent was to sort of raise educational outcomes for girls across an area, or school district or something, then it would be universal, and you would not be able to do the random assignment ideas. I think it just depends on the context, and I think that there are most many contexts where you cannot do the random assignment counterfactual type of argument. And in that case, these are the approaches I'm talking about are doable, and I would argue can provide quite solid, reasonably solid evidence on causality.
Okay, Elliot, do you want to come here?
Hello, John. Can you hear using this microphone? It's not very well.
No.
Okay. Hi, John. It's Elliot yet again. Hope you're still enjoying the Far East. Or are you back now in Canada?
No, I'm still in Thailand another few weeks.
Lucky man. Right. It did strike me that there was one area that, given that we were involved in the work, spent months discussing it, it's the optimism that you have about theories of change and the skepticism that sometimes I and others express about theories of change. So I wanted to challenge one sentence. To say the theory of change is a causal package, would it be possible, would you be comfortable if we said theories of change can be a model of a contributory cause, depending on how you do your theory of change? Mainly because it seems to me that unless you clarify your assumptions and identify what the supporting factors are, which often don't appear in some versions of theories of change, you wouldn't have the necessary mix that you were identifying as a part of the analytic frame you were putting forward. The second thing that I wanted to highlight was that I thought that phrase where you were talking about it's sufficient if you can both confirm that the assumptions and supporting factors are in place and eliminate rival explanations. That's the strongest form of proof that you can have of causal inference using these kind of approaches. If you can do both of those things, you're in a strong position. If you can only do one of them, you're in a much weaker position. And there is a whole framework of judging these things that Bennett and others have put forward. I think it's the hoop diagram, where he emphasizes that the strongest form of confirmation that we have is where we can both support our hypotheses or assumptions and eliminate the rival explanations. And I thought that's worth highlighting because it didn't quite come over from the slide as strongly as that. But I'm mainly interested in whether you're remaining optimistic about the theory of change, or whether you would be happy to insert the clarifying assumptions and identifying supporting factors as being a way of having greater confidence that would work.
Yes, Elliot. Yes, for sure. I would accept that. That's why in the diagram I presented, I tried to indicate that the supporting factors and what are assumptions that are behind the links are there. There may be many, and they need to be well articulated and set out. And hopefully, some or many of them are, in fact, supported by some prior evidence, that it's not just wishful thinking of the implementers, but there's some prior research has been done to sort of show that some of these links that you're expecting, some of the way things are supposed to work, have some solid evidence. So yes, I think my vision of a theory of change is a fairly thorough theory of change, and the more perhaps the sort of the left-hand side of that slide that just showed the irregular results chain. You're right, that is often sort of said to be a theory of change, when in my view it isn't at all. It's just a results chain, which is the bare bones of a theory of change. So there certainly is lots of, I think, misuse of the term, a theory of change, and many things called theories of change out there that are, in my view, not close to what they should be. So yes, I'm agreeing with that, and if that's sort of done, I am optimistic. In particular, to the idea that in a lot of the situations that I'm looking at these days, where this is all recognized, then those various supporting factors that are identified are recognized as real, and that's the right-hand column of that diagram. There are specific actions taken by those to sort of get other players, other NGOs, other partners involved to sort of do their bit to make those supporting factors come about, and that then provides a very good way of making use of this more fuller theory of change than what you often see.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions? No? Okay. Rosemary. Don't have to be sorry.
So this is Rosie McGee from IBS. I hope you can hear. I was just wondering, in talking about the theory of change as an essential part of the causal package, I was just wondering what are the other essential parts, or what comes in within the causal package versus not in the causal package, and how can you work that out? Because as I understand it from the diagram, there are your assumptions and risks. Is that what's outside of the causal package? I'm looking for the slide.
No.
Really use the terms.
Yeah, no, sorry. No, I'm arguing or suggesting that a theory of change, as I've described it, is the causal package, the model of the causal package, and it's all there. Yeah, you have the causal package is the intervention activities, and then these other supporting factors that are going to influence the outcome. And that collected together, that's the causal package. The causal package is just a list of X number of factors that are together somehow are going to bring about, are sufficient to bring about the outcome. And those should all be captured in the theory of change. So there's shouldn't be anything outside that. Although, when in practice, if you're looking at, for example, why things haven't occurred. You might then discover that, oh, yes, now with hindsight, we now realize that there were several other supporting factors that we didn't appreciate at the outset that we needed to bring into the package to make things work.
Okay, so if I could just press a little more on that question, thinking of using a theory of change approach over a long-term program. I mean, I've assumed in the work I'm doing, which tries to do this, that then the theory of change has to be seen as something that's live and has to be adapted as you move forward and as you identify perhaps more and more or different elements that also are part of the causal package. Is that how you would
Yes.
use the theory of change approach in the long term?
Yes, I would see it as an evolving model as you learn, and as a model that will allow you then to sort of undertake adaptive management as you go along. So when you see things aren't working out as expected, then either you're doing things wrong, or maybe the model is missing something or not working, and you would correct it and move on. So yes, it is evolving. It would be evolving.
Okay, thank you. Conditions, also known as variables on the columns, and then the ones are for presence of the condition, and the zeros are for absence of the condition. So basically, for each case, we say, okay, we observe the presence of these three conditions, and then this is the outcome, okay? So it's a very simplified version of of a fragment theory, of a theory of change. It's like, we probably need this condition and this condition and this condition in order to be successful. But this is just empirical information on one case. So, it's not enough to sort of establish causality. So how do we establish causality, and how do we say this is a contributory cause and this is a important, necessary contributory cause or not? We compare this, the case with another case. Well, so it's a counterfactual logic with a similar configuration, which is basically identical, except for, in this case, the intervention. And this sounds very much like the logic of the counterfactual. I mean, it's based on Mayne's methods of difference, exactly as the counterfactual is based on Mayne's methods of difference. Okay, so if I compare, for example, case B and D, this is the only difference between these two cases, and I observe a difference in the outcome. So I say, yes, this intervention was successful because it made a difference in the outcome. Okay, so this is the counterfactual logic. The difference between the counterfactual logic and the causal package reasoning, contributory cause, is that actually this result is very much contingent on the context. Because if we look at other cases, so for example the cases A and C, they are successful, but they don't need the intervention to be successful. So what's the difference between cases B and D and cases A and C? The difference is that the impact is contingent on this condition, which is low quality of health systems. So if I change the context and compare to similar cases that have, where the quality of health system is high, then I discover that the intervention is no longer relevant. Because in one case I have intervention, in another case I don't have intervention, so I do the same case control comparison. But the result doesn't change, I have no impact. So I think, I don't know, I mean, correct me, John, if I'm wrong, but I think the idea behind contribution analysis is to say there is no single cause that makes the difference, but one cause can make the difference in a given context, and as soon as I change the context, then it's another cause that makes the difference. So results are contingent on the context. And so in this case, that would be a principal contributory cause in this context because it makes a difference there. And okay, well, I don't have any principal contributory cause in the other two contexts because, of course, I don't always, I don't necessarily have observed contributory causes all the time. So, yeah, okay. So I thought that could be a way to, in a way, structure some of the causal reasoning around causal packages and necessity and sufficiency, and this is what QCA can do. Okay.
Can I just add something to that? Because it's quite.
Yes, very quickly, Alex.
To me, the issue here is that there are lots of ways of representing a similar phenomena. I think the generic category for me is combinatorial causality, which is that there are different ways of combining causal factors, and that's the heart of a particular approach. Now, I think that causal packages, the way John and the rest of us defined things, is one way. I think causal pies, which is a phrase that Mackey and his colleagues in the public health field use. I think theories of change, as John defines it, in his more elaborated form of a theory of change, is another. QCA truth tables are another. I think realist configurations are another. All of them are attempting to say something in the similar area. They're all attempting to say, if we look at the way things combine together in particular contexts, that's a better way of understanding what causes things than any one way. The reason I'm making this emphasis is that I think it's really important that we as practicing evaluators and researchers, that we escape the brand image. But we don't simply think that because we represent it, some people like to represent it through QCA, some people like to represent it through theories of change, some people like to represent it through generative causation in realist analysis and configurations. All of those are actually struggling to say something very similar, so that we don't get into saying, I'm saying this but not that, this is true and that's false, but we recognize that they are part of a family of understandings that are trying to address a similar problem from a very common philosophical realist position.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my little blast from the past.
Thank you, Elliot. So shall we let John reply briefly and then quick close session unless someone has... Okay, so no burning questions? John?
Yeah, I think Elliot's last point is quite useful. I think, and I tried to suggest we all have our sort of backgrounds and ways of looking at things, and I think there are different ways of thinking about causality. I think that's sort of important. I mean, I've been at many presentations where I hope I'm being heard okay. Sort of the only legitimate view of causality is using a counterfactual approach, and I think that's just not true. And I think in many cases you really can't apply that approach very well, and you need some of the other kind of approaches. And Elliot mentioned several that can be used to deal with these more complex, complicated cases.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we have another round of applause?